A sprawling mansion in Beverly Hills, marble floors, a grand piano, a family portrait smiling over the fireplace. But on August 20th, 1989, this palace of privilege became a blood-soaked crime scene. Two brothers, Eric, just 18, and Lyle, 21, dialed 911, their voices trembling, begging for help. "Someone killed my parents," they screamed. The Menendez brothers wept for the cameras, clutching each other like lost children. The press ate it up, grieving sons. The headlines read. But then, a tennis coach came forward. A $700,000 spending spree surfaced. And suddenly, America's sympathy curdled into rage. Monsters, people whispered. They blew their parents away for the money. But then, the brothers' lawyers dropped a truth bomb in court. A story so dark, so twisted, it made jurors gasp. They claimed Jose Menendez wasn't just a Hollywood exec, he was a predator. That Kitty Menendez wasn't just a socialite, she was an accomplice. That those boys didn't murder out of greed, but terror. So tonight, we're diving into the question that's haunted true crime fans for 35 years. Were Eric and Lyle Menendez sexually abused, or did they invent the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card? So strap in. This case is a hall of mirrors where nothing is what it seems. Jose and Kitty Menendez died on a warm August night. Their bodies lay in the living room of their Beverly Hills mansion, each shot 6 times. 12 bullets total. The crime scene was gruesome, blood splattered across Persian rugs. Shattered glass from a wine bottle still rolling on the floor. At first, the brothers played their parts perfectly. Eric and Lyle sobbed to reporters, calling their parents their best friends. But cracks in the story appeared fast. The media pounced. Headlines screamed, "Killer kids." Tabloids leaked photos of Eric and Lyle partying in LA clubs just days after the murders. They blew $700, 000 in months, Rolex watches, a new Porsche, even a steak in a sushi restaurant. America decided these were spoiled rich brats who killed for cash. But then the trial began, and the brothers' lawyers flipped the script. Eric and Lyle claimed they didn't do it for money. They did it to survive. They testified that Jose Menendez had raped them for over a decade, starting when Eric was just 6 years old. They said he'd threatened them with a shotgun if they ever told. And Kitty? They claimed she knew, that she'd walk past locked bedroom doors and do nothing. Suddenly, the story wasn't about greed anymore. It was about 2 boys who swore they pulled the trigger to escape a lifetime of torture. But here's the problem. There was no proof. No police reports. No hospital records. Just their word against a pair of corpses. So, did the jury believe them? Or was this the most twisted excuse in true crime history? If the Menendez brothers were lying about the abuse, they were really good at it. Their lawyers painted a picture of pure horror. Eric and Lyle, they claimed, weren't killers, they were prisoners. Prisoners in their own home. According to the defense, Jose Menendez didn't just hurt his sons. He controlled them, humiliated them, terrorized them, for years. But how do you prove something like that when the only witnesses are the accused and their parents are dead? Let's start with what we do know. During the trial, a childhood friend of Eric's took the stand. He said that even as kids, Eric acted off, like he was scared of his own shadow. He'd flinch if someone touched his shoulder. He'd panic if he had to change clothes in the locker room. Once, after sleeping over at Eric's house, the friend claimed he heard shouting downstairs, Jose screaming, "You'll never be a real man." Then there were the therapists. Dr. and Burgess, a forensic psychologist, testified that Eric showed classic signs of long-term trauma. Nightmares, paranoia, a crippling fear of authority. She told the court Eric described being molested as early as 6 years old. That Jose would sneak into his room at night, whispering, "This is our secret." Lyle's story was even darker. He said his father threatened him with a shotgun if he ever told anyone. That Jose would make him kneel for hours on rice kernels as punishment. That their mother, Kitty, once walked in on the abuse and quietly shut the door. But here's where things get complicated. The prosecution shot back hard. "Where's the proof?" they demanded. No teachers ever reported bruises. No doctors ever treated injuries. No relatives ever saw Jose act inappropriately. Even the family housekeeper testified. Those boys were spoiled, not scared. Then came the bombshell. The defense called a cousin, Diane Vander Molen, to the stand. She swore under oath that she was abused by Jose too, that he'd assaulted her when she was just 14 years old. That Kitty knew and did nothing, but the prosecution tore her apart. They revealed she'd been paid by the defense for her testimony. Suddenly, her credibility crumbled. So who do you believe? The defense argued abuse victims rarely have proof. That shame keeps them silent. That wealthy families like the Menendezes could hide anything behind closed doors. The prosecution called it a made-for-TV melodrama. They pointed out the brothers never told anyone about the abuse, not friends, not girlfriends, not even their own therapists, until after they were charged with murder. But here's the thing about trauma. It doesn't always leave a paper trail. One juror later said, "I believe they were abused, but not that it excused murder." Another admitted, their tears felt too real to fake, yet without evidence. It all comes down to a feeling, a gut instinct, and the Menendez brothers knew that. They wept on the stand. Eric's voice cracked as he described his father's hands squeezing his throat if he resisted. Lyle stared at the floor, whispering, "I just wanted it to stop." But critics saw a performance, a desperate act by two smart, privileged kids who studied true crime cases and thought, this could work. So let's break it down coldly. The defense's case relied on three things: the brothers' testimony, raw, emotional, and uncorroborated; therapists' opinions, based solely on what Eric and Lyle told them; a few shaky witnesses like Diane, whose motives were questioned. The prosecution's rebuttal? No history of violence. Jose had no criminal record. No complaints at work. The money? The brothers drained their parents' accounts post-murder. The timeline? Why wait until after the killings to speak up? But let's get brutally honest. Abuse thrives in silence, in secrets, in families where image is everything. Jose Menendez was a Hollywood executive, a man obsessed with reputation. Kitty was a former beauty queen clinging to her glamorous life. If the abuse did happen, threatening the boys into silence fits perfectly. But if they lied, they exploited one of society's darkest truths. We want to believe victims. We need to, because the alternative, that someone would fake such pain, is too sickening to accept. So where does that leave us? Forensic experts are still divided. Some say the brothers' behavior, the overspending, the erratic lies, matches victims of extreme trauma. Others say it's textbook sociopathy. But maybe the most chilling detail came from Eric himself. During a taped therapy session, he said, "I hate that people think we're monsters, but how could they understand? We lived in a house with no mirrors because the truth was too ugly to face." In the end, the Menendez case forces us to ask a terrifying question. When there's no proof, how do we separate truth from survival lies? And what if we get it wrong? The prosecution didn't buy the brothers' story. Not one bit. They called the Menendez case the perfect murder plot, a calculated, cold-blooded crime disguised as self-defense. Let's break down why they thought Eric and Lyle were lying through their tears. First, the money. 3 days after the murders, Eric and Lyle went on a $700,000 spending spree. They bought Rolex watches, designer suits, a $60,000 Porsche. They invested in a sushi restaurant. They even tried to buy a private tennis club. Prosecutor Pamela Bozanic slammed this in court. This isn't grief. This is a celebration. And the timing? Suspiciously perfect. Jose and Kitty died just weeks after changing their will. The new version left everything to Eric and Lyle. The prosecution argued the brothers knew this, that they'd been scheming for months. But the defense fired back. They were kids. They didn't understand finances. The prosecution's reply? Kids don't drain their parents' bank accounts before the bodies are cold. Next, the spoiled brat angle. A cousin, Brian Anderson, took the stand. He grew up with the brothers, and his testimony was brutal. They were never abused. Jose gave them everything: cars, vacations, Ivy League tutors. They were spoiled rotten. The prosecution hammered this home. They showed photos of Eric and Lyle grinning on ski trips, posing with their new cars, living the high life. Their argument? These weren't scared, abused boys. These were entitled rich kids who wanted more. Then came the clincher, the brothers' own words. In a secretly recorded therapy session played in court, Lyle said something chilling. If we wanted to kill them, we could have made it look like a robbery, but we didn't. The prosecution pounced. That's not trauma talking. That's a killer rationalizing his crime. They argued the brothers chose to shoot their parents 12 times at close range, a crime of pure rage. Not fear. Jose was shot in the back of the head while watching TV. Kitty was killed as she ran away. Execution style. The prosecutor called it, but the defense claimed the brutality proved their terror. They panicked. They didn't plan this. The prosecution scoffed. Oh, it was planned. They bought shotguns weeks earlier. They lied to their parents about going to a movie, the perfect alibi. Then came the million-dollar question. Why? Why would two privileged teens, honor students with Ivy League futures, murder their parents? The prosecution's answer was simple: greed. They claimed Eric and Lyle were addicted to luxury. Jose had threatened to cut them off financially after discovering Lyle's reckless spending. So, the brothers eliminated the problem, permanently. But here's where the prosecution got clever. They didn't just attack the abuse claims, they attacked the timing. Think about this. Eric and Lyle never told anyone about the abuse, not friends, girlfriends, or even therapists, until after they were arrested. Not a single text, diary entry, or email mentioned it before the murders. The prosecution called this convenient amnesia. And the brothers' behavior after the killings? Even stranger. They didn't flee. They didn't hide. They stayed in Beverly Hills, partying at clubs, flaunting their new wealth. The prosecution argued real abuse victims would have run, not stuck around to cash checks. But the defense countered. They were in shock. They didn't know how to act. The jury wasn't buying it. In closing arguments, Prosecutor Bozanic held up a photo of Jose and Kitty's blood-soaked couch. This isn't survival. This is slaughter. And these two, she pointed at Eric and Lyle, are the most dangerous liars of all. They're using real victims' pain as a shield. The defense screamed objection. The judge overruled. But the damage was done. The prosecution's case boiled down to this. Abuse claims are tragic. But these claims? They were a script, a performance, a way for two manipulative killers to play the victim. So, did the jury believe them? In the first trial, they couldn't decide. It ended in a hung jury. But in the retrial, the prosecution tightened their case. They focused less on the money and more on the brothers' lies. They proved Eric and Lyle had faked a burglary, that they'd invented stories about mob hitmen, that their tears in court didn't match their laughter on jailhouse tapes. In the end, the jury agreed. The Menendez brothers weren't victims. They were predators. But here's the twist. Years later, new evidence emerged. A letter from their cousin, testifying about Jose's abuse before the trial. A witness who heard Kitty confess she failed her sons. Too little, too late. The prosecution won, but the debate never died. Because when you strip away the money, the lies, the theatrics, you're left with two haunting questions. Can greed really make someone kill their parents in cold blood? Or did the justice system fail to see a truth too dark to believe? This wasn't just a trial. It was a spectacle. For the first time in history, cameras rolled inside an American courtroom, broadcasting every tear, every scream, every shred of doubt to millions. And what they captured changed true crime forever. The Menendez trial wasn't about legal strategy. It was about emotion. Eric and Lyle didn't just sit there, they performed. They wept as they described their father's abuse. They shook when recounting threats with a shotgun. At one point, Eric hyperventilated so badly, the judge had to pause proceedings. Viewers were hooked. Daytime TV ratings skyrocketed. People skipped work to watch. But this wasn't entertainment. These were real lives and real deaths, playing out like a soap opera. The cameras that changed everything before Menendez. Trials happened in shadows. But in 1993, Judge Stanley Weisberg allowed cameras in. His reasoning? The public deserves transparency. Big mistake. Suddenly, the brothers' tears weren't just for the jury. They were for America's living rooms. Lyle's voice cracked as he described finding his mother's body. She was still moving. I didn't know what to do. Eric broke down, recalling his father's smell during abuse. Prosecutors hated it. They argued the brothers were acting, playing victim for the cameras. One snarled, "This isn't reality show. Stop crying and answer the question." But the damage was done. The footage humanized Eric and Lyle in ways newsprint never could. For the first time, people wondered, what if they're telling the truth? The jury from hell, the first jury, was a disaster. 12 strangers, split down the middle, half believed the abuse claims. One juror said, "Those boys were dead inside. You can't fake that." The other half thought it was all a con. Another juror snapped, "They're manipulative rich kids. Period. After 6 months of testimony, they deadlocked. No verdict. The judge ordered a retrial. This time, the prosecution went nuclear. They banned the abuse narrative. The brothers couldn't mention Jose's threats or Kitty's silence. The defense was gutted, like fighting with one hand tied behind our backs. Their lawyer said, but the prosecution had a new weapon, jailhouse tapes. In secret recordings, Eric and Lyle laughed with visitors, joked about their legal team, even mocked the abuse allegations. One chilling clip caught Lyle saying, "We'll be out by Christmas." The message was clear. These aren't victims. They're sociopaths. The verdict that solved nothing, in the end. The second jury took just 5 days to decide. Guilty. Life in prison without parole. Eric collapsed, sobbing. Lyle stared blankly ahead. Their aunt screamed, "You're killing them twice." But here's what nobody said out loud. The verdict didn't answer the real question. Did the jury reject the abuse claims entirely? Or did they think the brothers deserved to die in prison? Even if the abuse was real, we'll never know. Jurors were forbidden from explaining their reasoning. But listen to what one juror slipped to the press. "I think something happened in that house. But murder? That's where I drew the line." The ghost's still talking decades later. The trial's legacy is everywhere. Reality TV court shows, podcasts dissecting every objection, even Netflix specials. The Menendez case taught the world, crime sells. But for the brothers, the cameras were a curse. Their tears got edited into memes. Their trauma became trivia. And the abuse question? Reduced to bar debates. In 2018, Lyle gave a rare interview from prison. The cocky grin was gone. He looked tired. "People think they know the truth," he said. "But they don't. They never will." Maybe he's right, because the Menendez trial wasn't about truth. It was about what happens when pain becomes entertainment and justice gets filtered through a lens. So, did the cameras expose the truth, or did they bury it deeper? Time doesn't heal all wounds. Some just fester. 35 years after the Menendez murders. The world still can't quit this case. Not because of the blood, the money, or the Hollywood glitz, but because it holds up a mirror to our darkest questions. When someone says, "I was hurt," do we believe them or dissect their pain for flaws? The ghosts that won't stay buried. In 2017, a bombshell dropped. A former neighbor came forward, swearing she'd heard Jose Menendez screaming at the boys late at night. "I'll kill you if you tell." In 2023, prison letters surfaced. Lyle wrote, "I dream about my father's hands." Even now, new documentaries dissect every frame of the trial. TikTok debates rage. Guilty or gaslit? Reddit threads pick apart Kitty's diaries. Why won't this case die? Because it's no longer about Eric and Lyle. It's about us. We live in an era of true crime addiction, canceled verdicts, and trial by Twitter. The Menendez saga was the first to show how easily trauma becomes content and justice becomes a spectator sport. The therapist's secret tape, Dr. Jerome Oziel, the brothers' therapist, recorded sessions with them in secret. On one tape, Eric sobs, "I can still feel Jose on top of me. I'll never get clean." Years later, Dr. Oziel told a reporter, "I've treated hundreds of abuse victims. Nobody fakes that level of pain, not even Oscar winners." But here's the kicker. Dr. Oziel was having an affair with Lyle's ex-girlfriend. He's no saint, and that's the Menendez curse. Every piece of proof has a hole. Every ally has an agenda. Every tear could be a trick. So we're left chasing ghosts. The justice system's blood stain, let's be brutal. The Menendez trial was a circus. The first jury heard about the abuse. The second jury didn't. Same evidence. Same crime. 2 different rules. The defense claims this was illegal, that banning their abuse narrative rigged the retrial. In 2023, they filed a 127-page petition demanding a new hearing. The LA District Attorney's response? The Menendezes had their shot. No do-overs. But legal experts are torn. Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz called it a textbook case of judicial bias. Others argue, you don't get to murder your way out of trauma. Here's what nobody wants to admit. This case broke how we handle abuse claims in court. After Menendez, "I was assaulted" became a double-edged sword, a defense strategy as much as a cry for help. Real victims gained a voice. So did liars. And now, juries don't know who to trust. The scariest question of all, what if they're both true? What if Jose Menendez was a monster, and his sons became monsters too? Trauma isn't a free pass. But it's not a fiction. Either. Eric and Lyle's aunt, Marta Cano, visits them in prison monthly. She says Eric's changed. He teaches GED classes. Talks about at-risk kids. Lyle, still angry. Still haunted. In 2021, a survivor of childhood abuse wrote to Eric, I don't know if you're lying, but if you are, you made it harder for real victims to be heard. And if you're not, God help us all. He wrote back, I don't blame you. I wouldn't believe me either. The Menendez case isn't a mystery. It's a riddle without an answer. Do we lock away broken children who became killers? Do we forgive murder if the reason's ugly enough? Or do we just keep arguing? Because the truth is too heavy to hold. Maybe some stories aren't meant to have endings. Let's be honest, we want stories to make sense. We crave heroes in white hats and villains twirling mustaches. But the Menendez case? It's a sinkhole. The deeper you dig, the more the ground collapses beneath you. So let's lay it bare. Jose Menendez is dead. Kitty Menendez is dead. Eric and Lyle will die in prison. And we're left with a pile of maybes. Maybe Jose was a monster. Maybe the brothers are liars. Maybe the truth is somewhere in the rot between. But here's the kicker. This isn't really about them anymore. It's about what we're willing to swallow. What we need to believe to sleep at night. I'll tell you a secret. Years ago, I met a detective who worked the case. Retired. Bitter. Sipping cheap whiskey in a dim LA bar. He said something that stuck. The Menendez file? It's got two truths. The one on paper, and the one that crawls up your spine at 3 a.m. He wouldn't explain. Just paid his tab and left. But I think I get it now. The truth isn't in the bullet casings or bank statements. It's in the questions that keep you awake. How much pain turns a victim into a killer? When does survival become murder? And why do we need to pick a side, abused orphans or greedy psychos, when the answer might be both? The Menendez brothers didn't just shatter their family. They shattered the fairy tale we tell ourselves about justice, that it's blind, that it's fair, that it fits. But real horror doesn't fit. It oozes. It contradicts. It mocks the idea of closure. Eric and Lyle know this. In a 2022 letter, Lyle wrote, Prison's easier than the outside. Out there, everyone wants you to be a symbol. In here, I'm just a number, a symbol, a Rorschach test for our own demons. Maybe that's why we can't let this go. The Menendez case isn't a story, it's a mirror. And what stares back isn't pretty. We see our hunger for true crime as entertainment, our suspicion of victims who aren't perfect, our collective gasp when privilege and horror collide. So, do I believe them? Some days. Yes. Some days. No. Most days. I wonder if it even matters. Because whether they're lying or not, we're the ones who turn their trauma into trivia, who dissect their tears over podcasts and takeout, who treat their lives and their parents' deaths like crossword puzzles to solve. But here's the verdict no one wants to hear. Some crimes don't have answers. Some wounds don't scar over. And some stories, they exist to haunt us, to remind us that truth isn't a fact, it's a feeling. And feelings, they rot. They shift. They lie. So where does that leave us? Right where we started, in the dark, holding a shotgun of questions with no one left to aim it at. Good night.